Hi, I'm Nicole Dyer from ABC Gold Coast and the proud ambassador of Gold Coast Open House. We hope you enjoy this recording from our 2022 Open House Talks program.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Gold Coast Open House 2022. My name is Philip Vollant, and I'm a committee member of Gold Coast Open House and very pleased to introduce this evening's event, Beyond the Water Views. In the spirit of reconciliation, Gold Coast Open House acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Gold Coast Open House is part of a worldwide architectural festival, in fact, the world's largest architectural festival, which started exactly 30 years ago in London and started by architect Victoria Thornton. The aim of Gold Coast Open House is to engage the general public in dialogue with architects through the promotion of contemporary and historical architecture and design in our city, to tell the stories behind the buildings and places we might often pass by and not really think about. Those buildings and spaces often enrich our city, and thereby a better understanding of these places and understanding the stories behind these places builds a stronger public appreciation of good design. We are a not-for-profit organisation and rely solely on volunteer and sponsors. Please support Gold Coast Open House by volunteering or sharing your experience on social media and with friends, and participating in this year's program. So it's a big welcome to you, our first audience, for the first of the panel discussions at HOTA, Beyond the Water Views. First, some housekeeping. In the event of an emergency, please follow the exit signs. Please switch off your mobile phones or to place them on silent. Now, to moderate tonight's panel discussion of Beyond the Water Views, Gold Coast Open House is pleased to introduce Karen Johnson, architect and educator. Karen, along with her husband, Chris G., formed the well-respected architectural practice, Coast Arc. Please welcome Karen to introduce our panellists.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us tonight. We have a great panel for you tonight. To my right, we have Chris Dirksma, who is the CEO of Gold Coast Waterways Authority, only recently started with them. Yeah. The authority operates through a place-based planning and delivery and management of marine and land-based infrastructure for the Gold Coast waterways, users and the community. And prior to joining the authority, Chris was the Sustainability Director of the City of Sydney. He also led the City of Sydney to become the first carbon neutral certified government organisation in Australia, implementing decentralised energy and water grids and embedded climate resilience. Chris was also the founding technical manager of version 1 of Green Star tool, and he has worked in both the infrastructure and manufacturing sectors, locally and overseas. He has an environmental engineering degree and executive MBA, and is the recipient of Vincent Fairfax Leadership and Ethics Award. So I'd like you to welcome Chris. Next to him we have the Professor Brendan Mackey, who is Director of Climate Action Beacon at Griffith University here on the Gold Coast. Professor Brendan Mackey is seeking through that to develop the knowledge and leadership capacity and responses to enable effective and just climate action throughout society. Brendan was notably coordinating lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 6th Assessment Report on Impacts, Vulnerability and Adaptation. Welcome, Brendan. Pradesh Ramaiah is with the City of Gold Coast Natural Hazards team. He's an urban planner within the City of Gold Coast Natural Hazards team, and his experience includes working across state and local governments and the private sector. His work has been recognised with commendation and awards from the New South Wales and Queensland governments and the Planning Institute of Australia. His current role is to develop and advance the city's land use and development policy in areas subject to current and future natural hazards, such as coastal hazards, flooding, landslide and bushfire. He steadfastly promotes nature-based outcomes to enhance urban resilience and the mitigation of future climate risks. And Pradesh is also a guest lecturer at Bond and Griffith Universities. Welcome to Pradesh. And at the end, last but not least, we have Hame Trasperderne. He's a Queensland urban design leader in planning and design with Arup. He's joined us here from Brisbane today, and he's a passionate urban designer with the ambition to create more resilience, livable and nature-based urban environments. He is an RIBA registered architect and urban designer at Arup. He's currently leading the urban design and master planning team in Queensland. Hame has significant experience leading visioning and master planning teams on complex development projects. His work extends from Europe to Middle East and Australia. Welcome, Hame.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for the introduction. Tonight's topic is Beyond the Water Views, designing a city surrounded by water. The Gold Coast's identity is shaped by its labyrinth of waterways. From our beaches to the rivers, creeks, canals and lakes that surround our city, our waterways are both natural and manufactured environments on a grand scale. But beyond the water views, how can we best live with and design for water? That's the question we're looking at tonight. In a world where water is both life-giving and a destructive force, what are the socio-economic and ecosystem implications for the Gold Coast as we continue to surround ourselves with water on all sides? In this open house talk session, our panel will discuss whether we, as a community, need to revise our expectations about our relationship to water. And as we look ahead to the Gold Coast of the future, do our architects and designers need to review how they accommodate water from the urban scale to the individual site? I will give each of our panellists a moment to introduce themselves to you. And from there we'll go on to some questions. And if we have enough time, we'll open to the floor at the end. So first of all, Chris.
Thanks very much. Look, I thought, given that I was the first speaker and given the organisation that I'm representing, I'd really just start at the high level. So just acknowledging, how lucky we are as a city to have a fantastic natural asset like the Gold Coast waterways. And as you mentioned, some of that is also manufactured, but really we have 170 kilometres of navigable waterways. We have 5 fantastic rivers. We have 750 hectares of lakes and 124 hectares of public land that adjoin those waterways as well. This asset also generates great economic activity, about $440 million of gross regional product and about 770 million indirect, and several thousand jobs as well. So it's an integral part of the Gold Coast identity. And look, prior to me joining the Gold Coast Waterways, there had been a really large engagement process to really develop the 10-year strategy of what the waterways should be over the coming years. And that 10-year strategy had really 3 strong themes of access, connection and destination. So first of all, access being, how do we actually get to the waterways? What are those ways that we can get into and interact with the waterways? Connections about how do we get through the waterways? How do we get from one place to another? And finally, destinations. What's the essence of what's drawing us out there to go and be involved in that water sort of space? And so it was a really strong strategy, but I suppose coming in with fresh eyes, what I see in the strategy is that's applied equally across the whole network. And really, our job now in the coming years is to translate that overarching strategy into place. great cities are usually a combination of areas of different personality, not a homogenous sort of one-size-fits-all approach. And so really I think the job that we've got in front of us and the opportunity for you beyond today is an engagement process we're going to embark on to really develop a place strategy for the waterways, to really answer the question for us about what are the waterways going to look like in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, and how do we take action today to ensure that we deliver on that outcome for not only ourselves but our future generations of the Gold Coast. How do we align that with the city's vision, and then how do we spread the benefit of that between all the different stakeholders that we have here at the Gold Coast, not just those who are wealthy, but making sure that we consider all the different people that need to interact with the waterways, and of course fundamentally taking care of this natural asset. If we take care of it, it will take care of us. And I might talk about a few more details when we have questions.
Which I'm sure we will. So Brendan, did you want to say a few words about the work you're doing?
Sure. So I was thinking, driving over here, actually as I was driving from our Gold Coast campus, my phone rang. I was on speakerphone, so it was quite legal, and it was a reporter from the ABC who coincidentally was writing a story. A report's just been released by some group, a consulting company. I think they did this under contract to the Climate Council. It's just come out where they made some assessment of climate risk to different geographic areas in Australia and what that implied in terms of insurance.
Another report.
And the big climate risks they were highlighting in their report was the risk of flooding. Right?
Never heard of it.
And she was asking me, of course she'd been referred to me because I'd been a coordinating lead author on the most recent IPCC report, and was this true, what they were saying about flooding being made worse by climate change, and could I direct it any sources of information that would validate this? So that was a coincidence, wasn't it?
So did you invite her tonight to join us?
Well, she was in Melbourne, so I thought she wouldn't want us, blow the carbon miles on the event. So, and that's just by way of saying, how consumed my life is now by this, because everywhere, and it's interesting because we've really been thinking about climate change, well I have, for 30 years. Like literally since 1992, that's when we had the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was agreed to by all the nations of the world, and we agreed that everyone would work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to prevent dangerous climate change. And then, we spent probably 20 years, maybe even 30 years, 20 years, thank you. I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm not that old. 20 years talking about the things to come, how we had to be prepared for a changed climate. Well, what our most recent assessment, and again, there's 3 working group reports. I was in the second one about impacts, vulnerability and adaptation, which deals with things like floods. The first working group report, its main conclusion was that human-influenced climate change is now a known scientific fact. There's no uncertainty. And we've now experienced 1.1 degree of global warming since pre-industrial levels. So that's like I explained that, it's like a temperature reading for the Earth's body temperature, right? So a healthy body temperature is about, 36, 37, 38 degrees is a fever, 40 is life-threatening. Well, a healthy Earth temperature is 0. It's 0 above pre-industrial levels. 1.1 is a fever. We're now experiencing 1.1. And the other main conclusion they drew was that we have another 0.4 degree locked in, which we're going to hit in about 8 years' time. So that's life-threatening. So all of a sudden it's no longer thinking about, well, how are we going to adapt to these future impacts? It's we're living them.
We're there now.
We're there now. This is just, it's not optional. It's something that might happen. So that's been a big change. It's been a big change for me professionally, because it really is a different framing for what we're now doing.
And Pradesh, the Gold Coast City Council, did you want to touch on what you've been doing here with the latest work that you've done, the Coastal Adaptation Plan?
Yeah, no. So yeah, I came to council. I came to the whole field, I guess, via I guess writing the Queensland government's first sort of statement on how local governments should be dealing with climate change, and I'll show my age now, in the 2000 State Coastal Management Plan, and yeah, from that and being a town planner and working both as private and public consultant, I spent a lot of years working in coastal environments, understanding how natural processes create a hazard where development's inappropriately located and where it's demolished the natural features that provide buffers and protective mechanisms for flooding, bushfire, coastal erosion. And so since landing on the Gold Coast and ostensibly working in the strategic planning department, you can't throw a stick on the Gold Coast without hitting a block of land that's flooded, coastal erosion's got bushfire, and I remember one of the first things I did when talking to a public or private an industry group is put all the constraint overlay maps in the planning scheme together and just say, all right, we'll find a piece of land that's unconstrained by any one of those three things. And when you add heat to it, then obviously everybody's affected. And so, yeah, so a lot of the work that I've been doing of late is building on a great legacy that's been left by some great engineering practice, some progressive policy making by the council and through the state government in order to preserve the city's resilience to flooding, to coastal erosion, to flooding. And I don't see my job as reinventing the wheel. There's a long storied history of all the coastal protection work that has been done to allow the economy in the city to grow. As I keep telling people, particularly in New South Wales, who are always worried about the coast transforming to becoming like the Gold Coast, and I was like, well, no buildings are falling into the sea at the Gold Coast these days. There's jobs to be had for the kids, and there's a future here. There's an economy that's growing, and as planners, we're able to influence that by creating resilient landscapes and resilient landforms, and moving now into resilient housing and infrastructure to support, what we now are starting to understand what will be more water coming into the city, whether it's coming up from the ocean or down from the top of the catchments. And so we put together our coastal adaptation plan under the QCOS program recently, and we've got our own in-house hydraulic modelling team that allows us to develop new flood mapping for both planning, infrastructure design and emergency management. And we're able now to better coordinate the rollout of land uses and development to be both resilient and accommodating of what we are likely to see as the landscape changes with everything that's coming out of it.
And Hame, the work you've been doing at Arabs, did you want to touch on some of that?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to start introducing that I'm from Madrid, from Spain originally. And what is interesting of Madrid is that we are very far away from the ocean, and we have a very little river. So our relationship with water is not good in terms that we are missing the water. So for people from Madrid, thinking about holidays, is going to the beach, is going to have that relationship with water. So it's very interesting, that everyone living in Madrid, you think about summer holidays and having fun, and you have those memories related to water when you really have fun during the summer. So I think that's an interesting starting point. And I guess from my experience over the last 15 years working around the world, I've been very lucky to work in climates that they are lacking of water, and climates that they have a lot of water in a few months, and then they don't have any water in the rest of the months. And places like Australia, like in this part of southeast Queensland, you have a constant level of water. However, in 2019, when I arrived, people were talking about the droughts, there is not enough water, now we have plenty of water. So I think that relationship of humans with water is intrinsic. We really need to have that relationship with water. Water is life. So in terms of the work that we do in Arup, is about having a holistic approach. In terms of design, we really believe that good design is the clue to respond to complex problems. And climate change, weather change, whatever you want to change to call it, the relationship between cities and water are very complex problems that we need to look holistically. And it's not a one-person solution, it's a multidisciplinary approach to those issues. So you really need to have the discussions with everyone in the room, engineers, landscape architects, urban designers, the community, stakeholders, everyone, in order to get to that journey, to get a unifying vision as a society of what is our future base, and work together to achieve that solution. And I think that's what we should be doing probably 10 years ago.
And Hame, you were also, in the conversation we had, touched on the democracy around access to water. Would you like to share some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like to talk. I did my master's degree in London, in the Architectural Association of London. It's a really nice small university that they really teach you to think about out of the box. And our thesis was a project in China, in Beijing, and I want to have controversial comments here, but just not in China, even in Australia, in other parts of the world, we don't think about the democratization of the access to the water. You know, you have those pictures that you have some complex with swimming pools and everyone having fun, and then next to it is maybe a neighborhood that they don't have those facilities, that access to that water. So the democratization of accessibility to the water, I think, is a very complex topic that we need to take into consideration. Looking at the Gold Coast, for instance, yeah, we have access to the beach, we have access to the canals, but that's not the democratization, in my opinion. At the end of the day, during COVID, who had more access to the water is people that they were frontline in those houses, looking to the canals or the first line next to the ocean. So we really need to think about society and share water as universal good for everyone, and everyone should have access equally. And that's part of the design and part of the way that we distribute our cities, our land uses, and our communities. And also the way that we design our public spaces and our accessibility to water.
And Chris, that's something that your organisation is concerned with, and that's what drives you, really, is the decision making.
Well, absolutely, and I think I totally agree. I think with such a valuable community asset like the waterways, it shouldn't be prioritised too far either in any particular direction. You know, yes, in some places there's a role for, you know, particular private ownership of particular areas, but there should be an appropriate allocation of that waterway space, that connection to the water, to the general public. And we've seen numerous cities around the world that planned many years ago where they might have had freeway systems, you know, in between their major, you know, city centres, and then along the rivers or along the waterways, because that was an easy place to build these major highways in those times. But then over time, you know, a reconsideration of those where those have actually been taken down, those freeways. And, you know, I know Seoul's a great city. That's a great example where they had a freeway that was going right through the city. Underneath that freeway was actually a waterway. And then at the end of the asset life, or actually I can't remember the exact trigger, but I think they ended up converting that into a linear park, essentially, through the city, and gave that space back to the people.
The value for the community. That's
right. And I think cities, as we, cities evolve, and globally, cities are in competition. They are providing spaces for people, and so the best and brightest people will go to those cities where they have the characteristics of where they want to live. And we're seeing that more and more, that people are choosing cities based, or choosing where to live, and then choosing the job second.
And particularly through COVID, though, I think that came to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we saw a lot of movement of population.
Yeah, I'm a prime example. I mean, I was working in Sydney, right, and sort of, had a conversation, and actually one of the people who made that happen is sitting in the audience. I just saw, made the decision to choose this as a place to live. And so when you come in and you want to be part of that community, you need to help, drive that city forward, I think. And access to the waterways is absolutely essential. And that's why, I suppose, in the coming year or two, we really want to have a very strong engagement process and ensure that we ask the community about what kind of waterways do they want to see in 10 years. Have we got the balance between public and private ownership of that waterway space right? How do we prevent, sometimes we get these sort of obtuse development applications that come in for major developments in particular areas of the network. And so we want to try and get ahead of that, get a shared vision that we can all commit to, and that hopefully will then help the development to follow behind that shared community vision.
And Pradesh, with the Ocean Way, that is something that the council has been addressing over the years in various stages.
It is. I mean, it's a fantastic piece of infrastructure. I think if you're building footpaths and walkways in your city, that's the best thing you can do. That's the most important bit of transport infrastructure you should be delivering. And I'm a big fan of the ocean walks and the ocean ways. But yeah, it's interesting to make the point about the democratisation of the water, because one thing that I've learned is, in my years of being a planner, is that everybody in Australia should give thanks to Sir Thomas Mitchell, the New South Wales Surveyor General, I should have researched this a bit more, but in whatever the year it was back then. Land used to be subdivided up to the waterline, and it would become private. So Bondi was essentially farmland that was granted to somebody who used to build roads, and it was private access. Anybody who wanted to access the beach needed to trespass to get access to Bondi. So Thomas Mitchell went, you know what? I'm going to reclaim that land and make that public. And he set the standard for public access to public waterways. The waterways, whether they tidal waterways, whether they be the open coast or bays or broad or estuarine or tidal rivers, it should be, as a principle, available to be accessed by the general public. It was interesting when I started working in coastal planning in Queensland. When we're doing the coastal plan, it was a very much a case of any coastal development now must retain a public foreshore, a set of land for whether it be for erosion-prone management purposes or for whatever reason. There should be a portion of that land that be made available to be accessed, and the water is always going to be. There's no private access rights on water under Australian law. So that's always set a standard. I've always been interested whenever I've travelled around the world and noticed that there's always these issues, particularly in island communities, where they struggle with tourist operators sort of owning not just the land but the beach and the water out. And people have trouble. And there are aspects of, it hasn't been perfect. There are some aspects of subdivisions that have allowed the subdivision to occur in what at the time they didn't realise was part of the beach system. When they subdivided, the land existed out there, but over time with erosion, it's come back. And so there are cases where, there is private beaches as such, not just in the city, but all around the coastal cities in Australia. But for the most part, we all have a genuine capacity to be able to access the foreshore. And the canal estates were about creating a product that allowed us to connect with the water. There was only, everybody wanted to live by the beach, everybody wanted a water view, until they actually, when they actually came up with the idea of creating canal escapes for residential development. It was all about allowing people who couldn't get access to that limited to have that water. And so you can't create a canal without the land on which the water sits being public, state government land. And so, we all can paddle around. We all can, we may not be able to walk through somebody's front yard into a canal. I know a few friends with canal properties that would still hate the idea. And there is a lot of opposition to those public waterway, the ocean walk, particularly for those properties that have been lucky enough to, have an unencumbered view, unencumbered access through the dune system. All those old beach sacks, you see a lot of them remaining down in Balinga and Tugun. But, for the most part, creating a transport link, a pedestrian link, an active transport link that allows us to not just connect with sea views, but connect with the dune systems, the environment that sits there. It's a wonderful treasure that we have, and we're so blessed that in Australia that it's our right to have it. It's legislated, it's protected. Governments go out of their way to make sure.
But with climate change, Brendan, where these wonderful assets of the city represent potential issues with flooding. We're seeing that overseas. We've got Pakistan underwater. We've got the Florida at the moment, which is has very similar sort of developments as we have here, with the water wreaking havoc over there, and just the eastern seaboard.
Yeah, it's
for the last 12
interesting.
months.
You could say that human-influenced climate change has democratised climate risk. Because, this is what's changed over the last 20 years or so. We used to think about adaptation being a problem for the developing world. The climate impacts are all going to be felt in the developing world, which they are. But, recent years have just shown how there is no safe haven from these hazards. And we've seen it here. So, this very much touches on this issue of justice and what people are calling kind of climate justice, in that how we now respond to this increase in kind of risk, climate-related risks and hazards, including flooding and inundation and erosion and the like. We need to make sure that's done in a just, fair and equitable way, that the kind of adaptation responses we have are as you noted before, are equitably kind of, the risks and benefits are equitably shared, if you like, and we don't do adaptations that make vulnerable people even more vulnerable. I mean, the obvious one is the cases in Lismore where the people, with the least money lived in the most at-risk areas. That's where the cheapest housing was, and those houses are now basically, in North Lismore, they are insurable, but the insurance is $30,000 a year, right? That's how much that's post-flood. That's what they're now charging for insurance. So obviously, there's some big issues there. So I think that, Australia's always had a problem with water, right? We've always had too little or too much at the wrong place or the wrong time, and climate change is just accentuating that.
And I guess that brings the question then, we've had all this flooding happening throughout the eastern seaboard. It's affecting different states, it's affecting different councils, local communities. What cooperation is there between the councils and the state governments to move forward with some solutions for this issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly on everyone's radar and agenda. There's an enormous, and I'll hand over very shortly for you to answer this one. But everywhere you look now, this is on people's radar. And I've just in the last couple of months, we've been speaking with. We're working with the Nowra Shire Council In fact, the work we're doing with Narra Shire Council in New South Wales is very interesting. This has been going for about 4 years now. We've been working with the local community and the local government to help develop community-based adaptation and resilience strategic planning to feed into the formal local government planning and operational planning. And we ran them in 2019 through a series of scenarios, one of which was that there would be a mega fire which took out the whole Shire, and they all laughed. Everyone laughed. They said, it's just not, please give us scenarios which are feasible, right? And Christmas Day, the Mayor ran Ted, sorry, not Ted, Darryl Lovejoy, and said, oh, we now get it, right? We now get it. So, and I also, interesting, Tweed Shire Council, just south of here, their agricultural program is now called Climate Resilient Landscapes.
Yes.
And I was invited to Ag Day there, talk about the IPCC report, right, and what it means for the Tweed. But they had 3 farmers there. They had one who was a 4th or 5th generation dairy farmer on the same property, and one who had just started farming there a year ago, and the CEO of their cattle collective, Cattle Growers Collective. And all 3 of them were talking about what you were just saying. Well, we know between droughts and bushfires and floods, this is our world now. We're not going anywhere. Don't talk to us about managed retreat, please. This is where we live and this is where our farms are. So the dairy farmer was going through all his strategies for how he's going to continue to have his cheese factory.
So then you're talking adapt.
Like he's
Accommodate or adapt,
it's we're not moving. This is our farm. It's been our dairy farm for 4 generations. How do I keep having a cheese factory here? Right? This is the problem he's got, but he's not. And the same with. So I guess my point is that everywhere I look now, people are Sunshine Coast City Council as well. I think are fully focused on this now. So everywhere I look, people have accepted that if things have changed, there's these increased climate risks and hazards. We have to work out how to live and work with them. So I find that very healthy. As to the cooperation between the states and local governments, I think I'd be interested to hear what you think that relationship is looking like where you sit.
Yeah, look, I mean, I can talk to that, I suppose, a little bit historically of my role in New South Wales and a little bit about, I'm new to this role here in Queensland, but, I think it does take a coordinated approach, and I think that, look, it's kind of a layer cake kind of an approach. You need to really have a good understanding of the attributes of your natural place. Where are the, how big are the catchments? What are the natural flows in those rivers? How often do we get floods? And then, do the flood modelling. Layer that up then with, what are the socio-economic, kind of characteristics of your different areas and where are the most vulnerable people living. And then you start to, look at the potential scenarios of, the 1 in 100, 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000. So you build that up at about what the impact is going to be. And then you can start to have a conversation about, well, what are the potential solutions? And I think that really needs to be done at several levels. It can be a very disaggregated approach, like should we all be undertaking our own actions on our own properties to mitigate against these larger impacts, of climate change, of heat, of flooding, of rain and drought and those types of things? Or do we take a precinct-based approach? Is that a better solution for a particular area? Or is it a neighbourhood approach? Or is it a whole city approach? And so, you really got to look through those different lenses in order to come up with the best solutions, because they'll all have an associated cost. But some of those solutions and the benefits of those might really surprise you. And I know I was involved in a very similar project looking at water supply in Sydney. And actually, when we looked at the decentralised approach, that instead of spending money on large, big grey infrastructure, more dams and desalination, it was actually cheaper as a society to run a program to help people put in energy, water-efficient appliances, to put in rainwater tanks and those types of things, because there were small changes that could be done over time rather than very big, large, lumpy investments that have high risk. And so maybe that, I think, in our local context, really, the Gold Coast City Council is the primary sort of government agency that should be having or leading that conversation. We are part of that conversation. We will provide information, and look, we'll try and drive them and hold them accountable too at times, and vice versa. But I think that's where we're at as an evolving city, and that's what kind of informed, intelligent cities like this do. And we're on that journey, and we need to continue that journey.
It's so when we were putting together the coastal adaptation plan, just to riff on a little joke you did at the start there, when we were looking at potential sea level rise impacts across the city, and once I sort of understood the role of Gold Coast Waterway, when we were putting together a plan, I said we need to get GCWA on board on this, because they will be the greatest beneficiaries out of sea level rise in the city. They will own all of the land that's under the water, and we need they're going to be a key stakeholder as part of ours. It was just sort of forgive the dry humour.
The wet humour.
The wet humour. Yeah, that's right. It's been interesting, because when you talk about state and local government relations, I've been on both sides of that, and I've been in parts at times when it's been very progressive, and I've worked in times when it's been, duck for cover, don't tell anybody you work in climate change.
So how are we sitting on that scale?
We're really in a good positive spot, to be fair. I know people say that and think, I have to say that as a member of the organisation. But no, we really are. And there's definitely room for improvements. What we're finding, is that when we talk about risks, and we did some work a little while ago with GCWA just before you came in, Chris, about improving that state and local relationship, about providing the type of resilient infrastructure that we need. Not only just to maintain the resilience of the city, but again, when we're dealing with these corporate risk assessments that come out, it's really disheartening that whatever we do as a local government, the sort of the big risk assessments that are done on terms of future exposure don't look at the value of what a local government contributes. They're happy when it's sovereign money coming in, state money coming in, and the type of state infrastructure. But on the Gold Coast, all of our protection works and most of our flooding works are all funded through the council. And it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary local government that does that. And you go anywhere across, not even, our coastal budget in itself is bigger than New South Wales. The amount of money that we spend shifting sand to preserve the city's resilience is extraordinary. And so we often find ourselves having to drag the state to come to the party, to say, guys, we know you have your policies, we know you have your positions, we know you have your activities, but our little universe down here is growing, it's expanding, despite everything that's going at it. And it's because we fund the activity, and we shouldn't be penalised for it just because it's a local government that does this. It's funded through the ratepayers. So it's I think that sort of relationship needs to improve, so we can start realising the benefits of all the activities that we've been doing on the city for quite some time, and work together, like how the council and the Gold Coast Waterways Authority works together here on end. I think it's going to be a great relationship that will be further developed.
Yep. And look, I think more generally, local government have an absolutely vital role to play, because often they're the level of government that have the relationships with the community. They understand the communities in which they help to implement infrastructure. So I think that sort of framework approach from state government with the understanding of the local relationships brought from the councils together is where the solution has to evolve from.
And Hame, it reminds me of the conversation we had around the work that was being done in New York, and also Shanghai. Yeah. Did you want to share some of that?
I think climate change is definitely a very important it's a very important topic that we need to take into consideration. I'm afraid that sometimes we approach climate change like COVID, like that's not going to happen to us. And what happened with COVID, if you see in Europe, I mean, how badly they reacted, that, you know, the World Health Organization said COVID is a pandemic, and there were the stadiums full of people watching football every weekend. And until you get 1,000 people in hospital, it's like you are not taking really actions into that. We cannot wait for that in climate change. We cannot wait for that number of people in hospital or that number of distraction, because it's going to be, it could be really badly. And also the adaptation of our cities, our urban environments, it takes longer than be locked down at home and ordering food from internet. Is a much more complex process. And we are late. We really need to react. It's part of the state, local government, absolutely. But also we need to work more collaboratively. Again, we cannot think about, nature doesn't have boundaries. So we need to think about our water systems as a holistic water system from the catchment area entirely, not just the local area that is affecting you. You really need to work collaboratively with the next local government and the next local government to understand the entire catchment area. So that's really very important. And then bring the community, educate that community. And the work that, for instance, is happening in New York after the Katrina hurricane, it was like, okay, yeah, this happened, this is really bad, we need to react. The first thing they did is to, so they decided to create this protection for the Manhattan Island and create like a public realm, like a linear park protecting Manhattan for the next flood, the next sea level event. So what they did is bring that community, because the community is the one that is going to enjoy that open space. And really educate that community that this is going to happen again, we need to react. And those are the benefits from you as a community when we are adapting the city for climate change. It's not just bad, it could be a really, in my opinion, it could be the opportunity for us to reconnect with nature and restore our relationship with nature. And I think COVID opened the opportunity of working from home. It was a taboo before, and now everyone is working from home. I think climate change is the opportunity for us as a society to restore our relationship with nature, to understand that we cannot build in areas that we shouldn't be building. And we need to retreat sometimes, we need to adapt, and really need to restore those ecosystems. And if I may just to touch, in the project in Shanghai and also in Miami. Miami is a really interesting city in relationship with the Gold Coast, has really interesting relationship. We created a framework there in order to create a more holistic and resilient city. And we identify 4 interconnected systems I'm talking about water resilience. And the 4 interconnected systems are governance, green infrastructure, blue infrastructure, and later on, gray infrastructure. The idea is that governance is the responsible of educating that community, is the responsible of designing the standards, the manuals, the planning guides, and implement those. The green and blue infrastructure are the responsibles to absorb that water, to manage that water for us. Nature-based solutions are going to make the work better than infrastructure done by humans. So let's learn from that. Let's use the green and blue infrastructure. So in our approach, we said we are going to try to maximize and really restore those landscapes to be able to capture and manage as much water as possible. And then we will use gray infrastructure as the last ingredient to cope with the things that the blue and green infrastructure can't, because we are already developing those areas. And as you said, the level of investment, if you invest your money, instead of big things, you do small things like creating more parks, creating more permeable landscapes, interconnecting the open spaces. We cannot have only parks. We need to have an interconnected green and blue infrastructure. If you invest in that, your money goes into be more sustainable, more resilient, but also creating an amenity for the city, for the people and the community. So you have double wins that a water treatment facility that no one is going to enjoy.
And the rainwater strategy that you introduced in Sydney, that was, or that you were part of?
Yeah, look,
That was part of a more permeable landscape in the suburbs?
Yeah, look, I think City of Sydney was one of the, sort of early adopters of sustainability kind of principles. And I think through sheer frustration, we developed a series of sort of strategies. One being the decentralised water master plan, which looked at this in a very holistic way, from water supply through to how much rainfall was coming into the catchment, through to water treatment. And talking about that layer cake approach I said before, I think what we did is we got some great data from Sydney Water about the water demand across the city. We had some really great economic development data that told us what kind of businesses were operating in different parts of the city. We actually had a 3D model of every single space in every single building and about 20 different building uses. So we could cross-correlate, what building uses were happening in what places versus the water use. And that way we could actually build a model to show where the water was being used across the city. And then we could use that model to say, well, actually in a commercial building, we know that 30% of that water is actually used in cooling towers to keep the building cool. So it doesn't need to be potable water, it could be recycled water. And so we then started to see where essentially the heat map was of where the best opportunities for recycled water were. And you've got to do that work, you've got to do that planning to kind of come up with those big ideas. And there was no way we were ever going to be able to fund a recycled water network. But hey, who would have guessed? A couple of years later, a light rail network was born, and so we used that as an opportunity to kind of negotiate with the state to say, hey, look, we've got this great plan. We're contributing as a council. At that time, I was working for the council. We're contributing a couple of $100 million to the project. As part of that, we want a recycled water pipe down each side of that light rail corridor. So now in the spine, in the centre of the Sydney CBD, you have a recycled water network. Near Central Station, there's a building development that overproduces recycled water, can push water into that network. And then as those buildings along that network get refurbished, they include recycled water infrastructure. And then, hey, in 20 years' time, you've reduced the water consumption at very low marginal cost because you were opportunistic to other projects.
And aware of the issues and planning ahead and just being opportunistic to piggyback those things. But I think we've just about run out of time.
I just had one more thing I wanted to say in relation to...
Yes, quick.
Yes,
just a quick one, and we'll open to questions.
Yeah, just being up, because I keep pointing out to visitors to the Gold Coast and colleagues, where's the concrete seawall? We don't have one. Like, why don't we have one? So all these reports, like the one I mentioned, keep flagging the Gold Coast as being at most risk from sea level rise in Australia, but why aren't we seeing any impact? Well, it's because of the soft engineering approach that's being taken.
The seawall technically is buried.
Yeah.
It's
a loose pile of rocks called an A-wall, it's covered in sand and some turf. It's a beach enrichment.
It is the sand nourishment. That's right. Yeah.
It is the increased water capacity of the canal estates. All of that has actually masked. I mean, the sea level rise is there.
It's bang on.
It's masked it. So we've actually, it's one of the most heavily engineered parts of the coastline, but in a kind of nature-based way that maintains the amenity of the coastline, the coastal ecosystems, and really has, if you like, been whether it was done
intentionally, that's right.
It's proven to be a very effective climate change adaptation. Very cost-effective climate change adaptation.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll see canals proliferate across the east coast of Australia.
It isn't a solution for everyone.
No, it's not.
But the point is,
it's saved the city. It has.
It's saved the city, and a lot of the assessments you see about the risk assessment for the Gold Coast don't actually reflect an understanding of what's been going on here.
And this is the whole point, right? So I think there's a responsibility, and I really look forward to continuing to work with the City of Gold Coast to tell the story better.
Right.
So let's acknowledge the great things that we already have. Let's go, okay, yeah, we actually do have not a bad system, but hey, maybe this 20% is the most at-risk area. So let's then engage on what are the potential solutions for those 20% area. And we may not be able to fund it today. That's not really, I think, the conversation. It's actually about what are the best solutions. And then over time, those funding sort of pools just tend to fall into place over time. That's what, as I said, that's what great cities do, I think. And I look forward to that conversation further with City.
Yeah, I mean, the point that you made before about, the four streams four streams that are about dealing with solutions, you bang on. You absolutely bang on about it because, we have transitioned from a concrete and steel interface to a more hybridised, and softer, greener, more resilient system as well. And this is, we actually are doing, not pioneering, but we are looking at how we might build resilience into our waterways, into our banks, our creek systems, particularly to look at, everything needs to be raised, everything needs to be lifted up, water needs to be channeled in different ways. Areas that shouldn't be developed perhaps need to be, re-established as being areas that are more natural. And so there's, as you drive north, crossing the Coomera River, if you look left to Damien Leading Park, you'll see 800 metres of bank rehabilitation that's been pioneered through our catchment management. And this is looking at revisioning bank stabilisation for erosion control through it. And it doesn't look great. You might look, it's a bunch of logs and some tree planting that hasn't taken yet. But it's creating a natural barrier to buffer or reduce the physics behind it are extraordinary. Like, it is just incredible when you look at how it all works together. And it's just taking some timber logs, putting them in the right spot, engineering them so they're stuck into the ground, that create a velocity buffer that reduces the capacity for water to lift sediment and remove it from the bank. It slows it all down. Natural planting allows that sediment to return over time, and it's gone through two major flood events on the Coomera River. Everybody thought it'd get washed away. It's stronger than better, and it's brought back wildlife. Fishing is extraordinary. There's wader birds that nobody's seen for a while now coming back and returning. It's been such a one, and part of our coastal adaptation plan is looking at how we might, because the physics of it is extraordinary, but incorporating that into the design, especially the urban design aspects of it, it's really exciting the way we can change the way we reconnect with nature in an urban environment.
So we have just 1 minute left. Have we got any questions?
Oh yes.
For the floor.
Just one way to stimulate the panel, just considering climate change, sea level rise, and the fact that the Gold Coast is a linear city. Where does carbon storage, Pradesh has sort of touched on this idea of aspects that can be embodied into, I guess even biodiversity, but this idea of as the city develops, where do you might see carbon storage fall into development in terms of storing?
Can I jump?
Well,
I've got an answer, but you go.
Well, the only system we have that works for sequestering and storing carbon are natural ecosystems, right? I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
And, the Gold Coast City local government area is about 100,000.
1,037 square kilometres.
1,000
100,000 hectares.
100,000 hectares. And that has large areas of natural forest and a big hinterland with a lot of bush, etc. And also we have coastal ecosystems, seagrass and others, which store carbon. So my recommendation is we need to take a whole of landscape approach when it comes to carbon. Obviously, so if we look at the carbon budget for the whole local government area, there's two things we can do. We can reduce our use of fossil fuel, right, by electrification and having clean energy sources to drive electrification. A lot of that's to do with public transportation, electrifying public transportation. and where we get our energy from to cool and heat our houses, but also, maximising what we do in terms of ecosystem carbon, preventing loss and degradation of ecosystems, protecting what we've got, doing restoration where that's possible. So if we take a whole of LGA approach, we can look at reducing our fossil fuel emissions and increasing our ecosystem carbon stocks in a kind of holistic fashion.
I think that's spot on. Yeah, I think we have a strategy in Europe that we call reduce, restore and remove. And it's exactly what you just described there. We can reduce our emissions. And maybe what you said, Gold Coast is a linear city, but there is no much connectivity in the east-west. So why we cannot use these green and blue corridors to improve connectivity between the inland and interland? That could be a really interesting...
Oh, we've done that. We've got 5 wildlife corridors that run east-west across the city, which align with our waterways network as well, and they're all being preserved strategically, and we're buying land to preserve land for that purpose, mainly also too for ecosystem buffering, which we're doing some research into how our rare and threatened will cope and how they will transition into. Coomera Wetland Project's another classic example of how we'll be looking at that. So the framework, I always say the city has great bones, for us to be able to sort of deal with a lot of these things. But just touching on your point, Robbo, waterways, carbon storage in waterways and seagrasses and mangrove systems are becoming, fundamentally more and more, the value of these things going on. And, I know there's people in this room who've done a lot of work around about mapping seagrasses, mapping dredge spoil areas, making sure that we can enhance that. And I think as we also too, I have a vision outside of my role as a council officer, but as we make our canal properties, I'm sorry for anybody, I'm going to scare who owns a canal property here, I'm not. But as we start to transition our canal properties into being more resilient to flooding, we are going to have to change that aspect of that hard bank. And for me, I think if the Gold Coast can pioneer a way of being able to create a softer bank along those urban amenity areas, we much like the Sponge City concept that we have, then we will see enormous benefits in both in carbon capture and storage.
We might have to leave it there.
Can I just make one comment? In terms of order of magnitude, though, that waterways opportunity for sequestration is the small tail of the large dog, essentially. Like the order of magnitude of the problem we are facing, there needs to be mass reforestation in many parts of Queensland and Australia, right? So what you can do within the city boundaries is good, it's absolutely essential, and you do it for many other reasons too, primarily to create great spaces, to cool the city and to make it a safe place to live, And so there's many reasons why you do it, and you coordinate that greening of the city with active transport, and then you end up with a really prioritised sort of transport network across the city. And those green networks, they become the great places to want to, ride your bike or walk or run or use a scooter or whatever instead of using a car. And so you've got to have that hierarchy of transport across a great city, but the greening opportunity needs to go hand in hand with that. Hand in hand with that is water supply to make that happen.
Yes.
That's actually a very small portion. It's only a couple of % in terms of the whole water supply issue. And so I think it's a really worthy spend in a city. Coming in with fresh eyes, I think the Gold Coast has a huge opportunity to green the city a much more in a much more grand way, and it would create a great city. And rain gardens and all sorts of things, right? So
So we might have to leave it there, Philip. So thank you so much, Chris, and my brain's just gone in. Brendan and Pradesh and Charmaine. Thank you so much for today. And